Imagine your mind as a vast inner universe with a radiant sun at its center, divine consciousness, pure, powerful, eternal. The solar mind, how to think from the center, not from the shadow, is a direct journey to the core of your being. A profound awakening inspired by the timeless teachings of Charles F. Haanel, a pioneer of mental power and the law of manifestation. This text won't speak of superficial positive thinking or empty affirmations. Here we'll explore the radical difference between thinking from the light, connected to spirit, to the center, to the source, and thinking from the shadow, a slave to fear, doubt, and the illusions of the outer world. Through these spoken pages, you'll discover how to reprogram your mind to align with the universal order, how to transform your thoughts into creative light, and how to silence the voices of chaos so you can clearly hear the guidance of the inner self. This is not just a text. It is a tool of mental alchemy, a map leading you to the solar consciousness that lives within you. Because when you think from the center, from the light, everything changes. Your decisions, your relationships, your destiny. Get ready, you're about to remember who you truly are. You're about to think from the light. You're about to create from power. You're about to live from the center. In every age of spiritual and mental transition, there exists a small group of individuals who are no longer content with repeating formulas, collecting scattered knowledge, or begging reality for fruits their thinking has yet to master. These are the ones who, having understood that thought is the cause, begin to realize that thinking alone is not enough. It is necessary to know from where one is thinking. For thought without inner direction becomes a mere reflection, and reflections have no light of their own. This work is written for those souls not for the beginner, but for the awakened, for those who have already tested the law and now seek to master it at its origin, the solar mind. The term solar mind is not poetic metaphor, it is vibrational precision. There is a mind that reacts, and one that radiates, one that receives its commands from the external world, from circumstances, noise, and the judgment of others, and another that emanates from above itself, from an inner center untainted by the swings of the outer world. The goal of this work is to guide you in the passage from the first to the second. You will stop thinking from the shadows, that corner where light depends on another's position, and begin to think like the sun, from the center, from above, from a source untouched by clouds. For years it has been said that sustained, defined thought is the greatest power in the universe. That authentic desire, held clearly, charged with emotion and repeated in silence, becomes causal order within the invisible fabric of the world. But what has not yet been said, because few were ready to hear it, is that the place from which one thinks determines the effectiveness of the thought. It is not enough to have a clear image, an intense emotion, or a trained will, if that thought arises from a self that doubts, fears, and needs to see in order to believe. There is a point within the being from which thought becomes law. That point is not on the mental periphery. It is in its nucleus. It is the center. It is the axis. It is what I call in this treatise, the solar mind. When thought is born from that center, it no longer needs confirmation. It does not wait for signs. It does not ask if it will work. It simply radiates. And that pure, steady, uninterrupted radiation organizes reality just as the sun organizes the cycle of life. Radiant thought does not seek to attract. Its frequency is so intense and so stable that the obedient universe curves around it. That thought is not launched like an arrow, it acts as a field. It does not ask, it emanates. It does not repeat out of need, but out of declaration. It does not wait, it affirms. And for that very reason its effect is faster, more precise, more absolute. This entire book will be a path to access that state. And for that, the reader must abandon deeply embedded habits of consciousness. One must unlearn the habit of reaction. One must cease thinking from the wound, from the story, from the emotion that demands answers. For the solar mind does not respond to wounds or needs. It only activates when thought arises from the recognition of one's own power, when the soul no longer identifies with its effects, but chooses to operate solely from its cause. This path is neither linear nor fast. It is vibrational, and its demand is not external. It is internal. It is about a total reordering of mental focus, replacing the mind that observes and reacts to the world with the mind that decides and organizes it. It is about stopping the mental current that seeks approval, safety, explanation, and replacing it with a still, unmoved focus, one that does not beg, does not fall into the trap of waiting for the perfect moment. The perfect moment is born of thought that has not been corrupted by need, and such thought can only emerge from the center. Throughout the following chapters, I will not teach techniques, I will teach state. Because what is proposed here is not a tool to achieve an end, but a total transformation of the axis from which the mind operates. Not thinking about something, but thinking from a new place. That place is the unshakable center that exists in every man who has chosen to no longer be a reflection, but a source, no longer an effect, but a living law. The reader will see the struggle vanish when they begin to vibrate from this center. They will discover that attraction does not need to be forced, that people, conditions, ideas, and opportunities begin to move toward them, like fragments drawn to a magnetic nucleus. For that is the natural quality of radiant thought. It reorganizes the outer world without friction, like fire transforms without pushing, like the sun makes the flower bloom without touching it, like the soul, once it has remembered its origin, organizes all it touches without imposing. This will not be a book of promises. It will be a book of recognition, a high mirror for the one who no longer asks if the mind has power, but now seeks to refine that power until it becomes vibrational perfection. You will not be asked to believe, but to confirm, not to let go of the world, but to reorder it from the new perspective of the solar self. And if you have made it this far, it is because you are ready. No one stumbles upon this knowledge without having already sown the invisible causes that make it ripen. This book does not find the sleeper. It finds the silent builder, the one who has discovered that the visible is no longer enough, and who now longs to sit upon their true throne. The one who thinks from the center and not from the shadow. The solar mind cannot be taught. It is awakened. And this is the book for that awakening. The solar mind, thinking from the center, not from the shadow, based on the teachings of Charles F. Haanel. We've noticed that over 80% of those who visit our channel are not subscribed. You can support this project by pressing the subscribe button and liking the video. Thank you for inspiring us to keep creating more and better content for you. Are you ready to begin transforming your life? Chapter 1. Central Mind, Thinking from the Core, Not the Periphery. Most men do not think, they merely react. They do not live from a center, but from the edge. Their minds, rather than being anchored in a steady axis, spin with the impressions, events, and external voices that daily pull their attention outward. They think in response to what happens, desire in response to what is lacking, and form opinions based on what others have said. Their consciousness is like a leaf tossed by the winds of circumstance, incapable of generating its own direction. This is the peripheral mind, the mind that responds, that evaluates, that fears, that doubts. It is a reactive mind and therefore holds no real authority. Its thoughts are merely echoes of external events. Its will is fragile, expended in efforts to control what it did not originate. Its creative power is minimal, unable to sustain an idea without polluting it with secondary judgments or emotions. This mind cannot create because it cannot hold. It cannot govern because it cannot remain within itself. It cannot transform because it has not yet discovered that all outer change requires first a thought that does not move. But the central mind is something else entirely. It does not dwell in the extremes of thought. It does not react to every wave. It does not interpret everything that happens. It is the mind that has chosen to think from its essential core, from a silent point where there is no struggle, only direction. This mind does not ask what will happen. It declares this is. It does not seek approval because it has already validated itself. It does not need stimulation because it burns with its own fire. Its thinking is not the result of pressure but the cause of a radiant emanation, and that emanation is what organizes everything around it. The transition from the peripheral mind to the central mind is the first great step on the path of vibrational mastery. It is the step from seeker to emitter, from student to frequency broadcaster. Thinking from the core means beginning all mental activity from an identity that does not doubt itself. It is knowing before desiring, being before manifesting, establishing oneself at the origin before touching the external points. And that point of origin is not found, it is built. How is the mental center built? First, by halting the impulse to look outward. The peripheral mind is obsessed with what happens, what is said, what others think, and what could go wrong. Its attention swings like a pendulum. The central mind, on the other hand, renounces that oscillation. and begins training to look inward without distraction, not with avoidance, but with authority. It knows that the outer world is not the source but the result, that visible conditions are shadows of internal images, and that what truly matters is not what happens, but from where you are thinking about what happens. The central mind does not deny the world, it organizes it. It does not flee from facts. It places them in their rightful context. It does not fear external conflict because it does not allow its thought to be absorbed by it. Its strength lies in the understanding that energy follows attention, and therefore its attention is no longer owned by anyone else. It belongs to itself. It is centered. It is in its axis. It is in its cause. To operate from this center, it is necessary to recognize that thought is not free unless it has internal direction. That desiring is not enough unless one knows from which identity one desires. That affirmation alone is insufficient if it is an attempt to convince oneself rather than the natural expression of an internal knowing that is no longer in question. Thinking from the core is speaking to the universe as one who gives an order, not as one who begs. It is sustaining a mental frequency so clear and non-negotiable that the obedient world begins to organize itself, without pressure, without supervision. For reality does not respond to the intensity of desire, but to the stability of emission, and stability is born only in the center. Only one who has stopped vibrating in reaction can begin to vibrate in creation. The peripheral mind tries to attract. The central mind radiates. That is the difference between the one who seeks and the one who knows, between the one who repeats formulas hoping for results and the one who has installed within himself a frequency so clear he no longer needs to repeat, only to sustain. Because he knows that sustaining, when one thinks from the core, is the highest form of decree. Of course, this requires training. No one reaches the center by accident. The transition must be made with discipline and decision. One must practice the act of remaining in the idea, in the image, in the constructive emotion, without yielding to the temptation to correct, to question, or to evaluate the process before its time. The central mind does not need proof because its vibration has already confirmed the outcome. It does not ask for guarantees because its certainty is the guarantee. It does not compete, compare, or explain. It simply emits. And by emitting from that center, life begins to organize itself, without violence, without urgency, without unnecessary effort. Opportunities arrive not because they are chased, but because they are summoned by the quality of thought that no longer wavers. Conflicts dissolve not because they are denied, but because they no longer find within you a frequency to sustain them. The environment adapts because the core is strong. From that point, creation becomes natural. It does not require rituals or anxious repetition or constant observation. It requires presence. It requires installation. It requires being so deep within yourself that no external noise is strong enough to pull you off your axis. And when that is achieved, when the mind stops acting as a mirror and becomes a sun, life begins to reflect that light with an almost miraculous fidelity. But there are no more miracles for the one who thinks from the center. Only law, silent, obedient, exact law. Law that responds to the one who dares to think not from the wound, but from the origin. Not from lack, but from cause. Not from demand, but from the consciousness of being. You can become that mind, you can take that inner throne. But first, you must renounce the habit of reacting. You must stop thinking like one who waits, and begin thinking like one who establishes. You must stop measuring results before their time and sustain the frequency, even when there are no signs. You must abandon the habit of looking at the world as if it held the power, and begin to remember that the only true power is born when thought stops spinning and begins to radiate. That thought, that mind, that center is not far. It is within you. And this work will help you dwell in it. Because the sun does not ask for permission to shine, it simply is. Chapter 2, Disabling Reflective Thought, the art of not responding to the world. Every mind that has not yet been trained to operate from its center is by default at the mercy of external inertia. It lives in repetition, imitation, absorption. Its thinking is not original, but reflective. It feeds on what happens around it and on what others have said before. It does not create, it reacts. It does not project, it rebounds. It does not organize, it is swept along by stimuli. This way of operating, though common, is deeply limiting. For the one who thinks in reaction is surrendering the command of their vibration to what they do not control. We call this kind of thinking reflective thought. It is a mental activity that doesn't arise from inner direction, but from outer stimulation. Something happens, and the mind responds with an emotion, a conclusion, a judgment, or an automatic decision. This pattern is so swift, so ingrained, that most people don't even realize they're not truly thinking. They are echoing. Reflective thought is the echo of reality, not its cause. And yet, one can live an entire life this way, reacting to the news, to the words of others, to the weather, to a stranger's expression, to numbers, customs, popular opinion. Responses come without pause, opinions form without reflection, fears arise without analysis. In this way, the mind becomes a surface without depth, a dirty mirror that reflects forms with no clarity or order. What does this produce? Instability, harshness, lack of direction, vibrational inconsistency. A reactive mind cannot sustain a coherent frequency, and if it cannot sustain it, it cannot manifest anything with precision. The universal law responds only to stable vibrations, to thoughts that are fixed in direction and uncontaminated by counter-reaction. This is why the first major step in accessing the solar mind is to disable this automatic response mechanism. The habit of thinking reflexively must be interrupted. The impulse to have an opinion about everything must be neutralized. The inner echo that tries to interpret what is happening the moment it happens must be silenced. For that impulse to respond, to analyze, to classify, to defend, to project, that is precisely what keeps the mind spinning at the periphery, far from the center from which it could emit an organizing vibration. Reflective thought feeds on three sources: uncontrolled emotion, undisciplined attention, and identification with the external world. When one identifies with the outer situation, any movement within it causes an internal tremor, as if the soul depended on its environment to know who it is. And that is the greatest mistake. The solar mind is not defined by what happens. It defines what will happen. To break the pattern of reflective thought, the first step is to stop the immediate reaction. In the face of any external event, a moment of stillness must be inserted. A brief silence. A vibrational pause. That moment is pure gold. It is the moment in which one can choose whether to think from the conditioned self or the creative self, whether to respond automatically or with power. The one who learns to insert this instant between stimulus and response begins to reclaim the helm of their mind. The second step is to disidentify from what is happening, to understand, not just superficially, but vibrationally, that the external event is not you, that the words of others, market fluctuations, other people's reactions have no real substance in your field unless you give them energy, that the visible is only form, and you are the cause. Thinking this way is not escaping the world, it is rising above it, not from disdain but from authority. The third step is to direct your attention inward, without interpretation, to observe without judgment, without adjectives, without unnecessary emotion, to turn consciousness into a space that welcomes without absorbing. Thus, when something happens, the mind does not tremble, it merely registers. And by registering without reacting, it preserves its power. That power can then be used to create, to affirm, to imagine with intensity, because it was not wasted in reaction. This training takes time, but its reward is total. For the one who succeeds in silencing the echo of the external world begins to hear another voice, the voice of the center. That voice does not shout, does not argue, does not contradict itself. It is a silent certainty, firm and serene. And when that voice speaks, the thought that emerges from it carries the force of law. It does not need to be repeated many times, nor confirmed. It is emitted once with clarity, and the universe begins to organize around it, as if an orbit had been drawn into space. Reflective thought could never do that. Its frequency is not constant. It is interrupted, fractured, redirected according to what the world says. But centered thought, the thought that does not respond but radiates, becomes the silent cause of new worlds. The solar mind is not a closed mind. It is an impermeable mind. It does not refuse to see, but it does not allow what it sees to contaminate it. It does not isolate itself from the world, but it does not surrender to it. It operates with vibrational autonomy. It preserves its energy, and from that preservation, it creates. From this day forward, let silence be your first response. Let non-reaction be your first act of power. Let inner thought become your true voice. And watch how, by not responding to the world, you begin to transform it. For the one who no longer reacts begins to govern. And you were born to govern, not others, not forms, but your own mental field. For there, and only there, your destiny is decided. Chapter 3. The Inner Fixity. When thought becomes the sun, there comes a moment in the art of thinking when no further correction, adjustment, modification, or reinterpretation is needed. That moment is inner fixity, not as stubbornness, not as mental rigidity, but as a vibrational state in which thought has been so deeply embedded that it ceases to be an affirmation and becomes an identity. When thought is no longer repeated out of necessity, but becomes the natural expression of the center from which it arises, what I call the immovable sun of thought is born. Until that point, the mind rehearses, affirms to convince itself, visualizes to hold itself up, corrects deviations, monitors emotions. But there comes an unannounced, unforced instant when the chosen idea becomes structure, and like the axis of the world, it remains fixed while all else revolves around it. This is the moment when thought is no longer built, it simply is. This fixed thought carries a solar quality. It illuminates without moving. It does not react. It is not interrupted. It does not fade with time or the absence of immediate results. It is installed. It is lit. It becomes the center around which all else begins to turn in obedience. For thought to reach that level of solidity, mechanical repetition is not enough. It must be repeated with awareness, with living emotion, and above all, from a self that no longer seeks external approval. For as long as thought is projected while hoping for visible results to confirm its validity, it cannot settle. As long as the self behind the thought doubts its own power, thought remains tentative. As long as it is repeated to see if it happens, one has not yet understood that repetition is not to convince the world, but to establish it from within. This is the great difference between infantile thought and solar thought. The former is thrown outward, waiting for an answer. The latter becomes fixed and generates the answer. The first wonders if the law will hear. The second acts from within the law as if it were the very voice of its fulfillment. And indeed, it is. Because when thought becomes unbreakable vibration, the universe no longer evaluates it. It executes it. Yet this requires a progressive process. The mind must be re-educated, led step by step, from oscillation to fixity. This is achieved through conscious repetition, not as a superstitious act, but as a constructive one. Each time you repeat a mental image with clarity, emotion, and direction, you carve a deeper line into the etheric field of the subconscious. You shape the mold, you tune the vibration, you consolidate the form. At first, this thought needs protection. It must be shielded from contrary thoughts, from emotions that contradict it, from words that deny it. But with time, and this is the glorious reward, the thought begins to protect itself. It no longer wavers. It no longer needs stimulation. It no longer asks. It has gained density. It has acquired vibrational weight. It has become law within the inner field, and like all that is law, it produces results by inevitability. The true power of this fixity lies not in force, but in consistency. It is not a violent thought, nor euphoric or excessive. It is a calm thought, like the heart of fire, burning silently, organizing without turmoil, transforming effortlessly. The solar mind does not think with noise, it thinks with depth, and the depth of thought is measured by its ability to remain unaltered. Now, what prevents a thought from becoming fixed? Doubt, anxiety, the need for approval, impatience. These are symptoms of a mind still peripheral, still dependent on external validation. That is why training is not only the repetition of thought, but the strengthening of the self that holds it, because a powerful thought in the hands of a weak self cannot be sustained. Thought becomes the immovable sun only when the self that emits it no longer negotiates its internal authority. This is the state I lead you toward, not to a new thought every day, but to a vibrational structure so coherent, so affirmed, so anchored, that it no longer needs defense, only maintenance. Like the sun that does not move yet moves all that surrounds it, so your central idea must become. No longer sought, but lived. No longer desired, but embodied. No longer affirmed in words, but affirmed in presence. And when this is achieved, all else reorganizes. Action ceases to be chaotic. Intuition becomes precise. Decisions arise without doubt. Opportunities appear as pieces drawn by an invisible magnetic field. For reality responds to fixed thought, not as a request but as a decree. So I tell you, do not think more than necessary. Think better. Think deeper. Think from that center where there is no alternative to what you already know. Install your idea as one installs a truth in the heart of the universe. Repeat until repetition becomes unnecessary. Emit until emission becomes identity. Sustain until you can no longer live without that center. Then thought will have fulfilled its mission. It will have ceased to be thought and become destiny. And you will no longer be the thinker who seeks results. You will be the being who holds a frequency so clear, so stable, so exact, that the world, silently, bows before it without resistance. That is the power of inner fixity, the power of not moving, the power of not needing, the power of being like the sun, immovable yet the creator of all life. Chapter 4, The State of Silent Radiance. How to think without tension, vibrate without anxious intent, and achieve without chasing. There comes a stage in the evolution of conscious thought when all struggle ceases, not because one has given up on achievement, but because the soul has understood. The universe does not respond to effort, it responds to vibration. Until that moment, the individual has affirmed, visualized, repeated with conviction, held onto ideas in the face of emotional storms. And that is right. It is part of the building process. But there is a point where thought no longer requires tension, and achievement no longer depends on movement. That point is what I call the state of silent radiance. Thought, when correctly installed, no longer needs to be pushed. It radiates. It no longer needs to be defended. It vibrates, and it no longer begs for results. It simply arranges reality around itself effortlessly, because it has reached a frequency so natural, so constant, so centered, that its mere presence is enough to initiate transformation. The common mind, still trapped in the logic of physical action, believes that the more one desires something, the more force must be applied, more tension, more planning, more vigilance. But that is the reflex of reactive thinking. The solar mind, by contrast, has understood that the universe is not impressed by effort. It responds to order. It does not obey anxiety, it aligns with vibrational coherence. In this state, thought acts like a flame, and it doesn't leap, and it doesn't rush, it doesn't ask. It remains, it burns at its core, it radiates without needing to be seen. And for that very reason it attracts, it organizes, it transforms. For that which does not struggle, that which is not moved by confusion, holds a natural power of direction. Thought becomes like the scent of a flower. It doesn't chase anyone, and yet all the senses perceive it. This state is not passivity, it is not resignation. It is the highest expression of mental mastery. Because only the one who no longer needs the world to confirm their thought can sustain a vibration without interruption. Anxiety is the vibration of one who still doubts. Tension is the seal of one who still believes they must force the universe. Mental pursuit is the mark of one who has not yet discovered that everything is already given. What is missing is only the coherence of the channel that receives it. And that coherence is born when thought stops spinning and begins to radiate. To radiate means to emit without seeking, to vibrate without forced intent. To think without disturbance is to hold the image without interrogating it. It is to live as if it were already real, not with words, but with the silent attitude of one who no longer needs to do much for everything to occur. Because the essential has already been done, aligning one's frequency with the result. A mind that radiates does not tire because it does not push. It does not enter into conflict with itself. It does not secretly doubt what it boldly declares. Its thought has become a steady current, and that current, like all stable things in creation, holds magnetic power. It does not need to attract, and what corresponds to it simply appears. From this state, the world begins to respond differently. Conditions cease to be obstacles, they become confirmations. What once seemed to require grand preparation now happens with simplicity. Action becomes precise, words become few, decisions emerge without mental strain, not because the will has been lost, but because will is no longer an instrument of pressure, but of permanence. To radiate is to remain, not in rigidity but in conviction, not in anxious waiting but in stable vibration, not in struggle but in certainty, and that certainty is not expressed in shouts but in silence. Because the silence of one who understands is the most powerful frequency the mind can emit. To access this state, the individual must have walked a path of disidentification from the external world. They must have released the need for immediate results. They must have abandoned the idea that the outer holds more power than the inner. And above all, they must have learned to trust their own vibration more than their circumstances. From there, life becomes a response. The day no longer begins with questions, but with internal affirmations. Conditions cease to be a thermometer and become a faithful reflection. And the soul no longer asks because it knows. This is the true rest of the creative thinker, the moment when one stops chasing and begins to emit with such purity that everything aligned with it comes without resistance. The universe does not move by urgency, it moves by order. It does not respond to cries, but to pulse. And if your mind has ceased to fragment, to interrupt itself, to contradict its own declarations, then there is no need to force anything. What is yours will come, what you have affirmed will be, and what you have vibrated will appear, not by chance, not by miracle, but because the thought that radiates in silence has already been recognized by the law as an active decree. And when that happens, there is no longer a need to think much, only to be. Chapter 5. Thought as lightning. Direct, pure, causal. Everything in the universe follows a pattern. A branch does not grow at random. A river does not flow without direction. A star does not shimmer without orbit. There is order, there is trajectory, there is law. Thought as organizing energy is not exempt from this truth. It too has form, direction, density, and geometry. Just as an engineer draws a straight line to transmit force without loss, the solar mind thinks in the same way, straight, without deviation, without rebound, without vibratory leakage. This chapter is not about what is thought, but how it is thought. An image may be powerful, a desire legitimate, an affirmation well-crafted, but if the thought that sustains it rebounds against misaligned emotions, breaks under doubt, or is interrupted by unconscious habits, its force dissolves before it takes form. Like sending a command through a frayed wire, the message either doesn't arrive, or what arrives is noise. The solar mind, by contrast, thinks like lightning, not because of speed, but because of pure direction. Its thought does not zigzag, does not disperse, does not become tainted. It originates in the core of being and projects toward the mental object like a straight line of energy, precise, untouchable. This is not metaphor. This is real mental geometry. Lightning thought does not rebound because it no longer seeks approval. It does not bend because it is not born from doubt. It does not stray because it seeks no shortcut. It already knows where it is going. This mental geometry, a straight line between cause and effect, is the purest form of conscious manifestation. Thought does not orbit the desired object, it pierces it. It does not wait, it asserts. It does not plead, it emits. And that direct, sustained, and contradiction-free emission reorganizes the vibratory field of the environment with a precision that might seem miraculous, if it were not simply law. Many think in curves. They approach the object but never touch it. They visualize, but they fear. They affirm, then revise. They hold the image for a moment, then wonder if it's realistic, if they deserve it, if it's right. That thought never arrives, or if it does, it comes twisted, intercepted by layers of confusion. The universe responds to the signal, but the signal was not clear. Lightning thought, in contrast, does not negotiate with itself. It does not pause to examine whether it should exist. It has been chosen and held as truth, and so its force is absolute. It is a clean line, like the stroke of a compass, without hesitation, and that internal cleanliness creates external conditions with the same precision. But this kind of thought is not achieved without re-education. The ordinary mind has learned to think like an anxious spiral. It circles the desire, touches it, and pulls away. It returns, compares, affirms, postpones. It has not been trained in straight-line emission. To think like lightning, the mind must first cleanse its trajectory. This means eliminating all contradictory judgment about the mental object, renouncing the need for others to confirm our vision, ceasing to evaluate progress daily. Above all, it means thinking with direction, not with anxiety. A lightning bolt does not doubt as it's released, neither does solar thought. Here arises a vital principle. Emotional tension creates mental curvature. Any thought emitted with anxiety tends to lose direction, but a thought born from internal certainty and sustained in firmness retains its course without bounce. That is the difference between a vibration that begs and one that establishes. One curves along its path, the other defines it. The solar mind thinks straight because it has no need to convince. It already knows. And that knowing is what allows thought to move directly toward its realization. No stumbles, no shortcuts, no deviations. When a thought has been emitted like lightning, direct, pure, causal, the universe does not interpret, it responds. It does not assess, it replicates. It does not delay, it organizes. Because the form was already embedded in the emission. And what has been released with internal clarity will be received with external clarity. To think this way is to issue decrees that do not require obsessive repetition. It is to affirm once with power and then to act, speak, feel and decide in total coherence with what was declared. For lightning thought not only projects, it outlines the path for every action that follows. There is no contradiction between what is thought and what is lived. Everything aligns. Everything rotates around that invisible axis installed by the mind like a line across the universal field. This transforms life completely. Decisions simplify, doubt evaporates, emotions organize, relationships change, because vibratory chaos is gone. There is a guiding line, and that line, unseen by the eyes but infallible in its impact, is causal thought that no longer fluctuates but begins to determine. This is how you must think from now on, not like one who searches, but like one who traces, not like one who wishes, but like one who declares. Not as emotional curve, but as mental lightning. Your thought is an instrument, and its power lies in the clarity of its emission. Do not beg the universe anymore, but trace it. Chapter 6. Golden Frequency, the vibration that bows to nothing. Thought, like all energy in this ordered universe, vibrates. It is not an abstraction, nor a shadowy, bodiless presence within. It is a real current. It travels, it emits, it organizes, it shapes the subtle matter of the universal field. And like every vibration, it carries a frequency. Some frequencies are low. They tremble, they become corrupted, they dissolve at the slightest touch of doubt. Others are mid-range. They take some form, but can be easily interrupted by opposing emotions. But then there is a higher kind, a rare vibration, constant, silent, luminous, the golden frequency, the one that does not descend, that does not falter, that cannot be contaminated or degraded, because it was forged from a higher state of consciousness and is upheld by a self that no longer wavers. I call golden frequency the vibrational state of thought that has been refined to its purest point and is held with such firmness that the world can do nothing but respond. This thought is not projected with anxiety. It is not launched in search of others' recognition. This thought remains in itself, calm, expectant of nothing, needing no confirmation. And that is precisely where its power lies. A thought vibrating at the golden frequency does not need to be repeated endlessly. It does not need to be defended. It is unaffected by external conditions. It is unweakened by time because it does not arise from lack. It arises from identity. It is not born of desire to possess, but from the deep recognition of what already is. That is why it cannot be corrupted. It does not seek results. It summons them. It does not demand the world to bend. The world simply does because its vibration is pure law. But to reach this frequency, thought must go through an inner process of refinement. Like gold purified in the crucible, thought must be cleansed of everything that soils it. Doubt, anxiety, contradiction, emotional noise. Only then does the vibration begin to rise naturally, without effort, like a flame that, once lit, burns with autonomy. How is the frequency of thought elevated? First, by clarifying it. A blurry, confusing, ambiguous thought cannot vibrate high. It must be defined, reduced to its most essential form, stripped clean of unnecessary adornment, because clarity is the foundation of all elevated vibration. Where confusion reigns, no stable frequency can form. Second, all emotions that contradict the thought must be removed. If the thought affirms abundance but the emotion is fear, the vibration is broken. If the thought is health, but the body dwells in complaint, the frequency will not rise. Thought must be accompanied by a coherent, elevated, unwavering emotion, gratitude without reason, joy before the event, certainty without evidence. These are the emotions that lift the mental field until it glows gold. Third, The thought must be sustained without negotiation. It is not enough to affirm it every morning and contradict it each night. It is not enough to feel it for a moment and then replace it with worries. The golden frequency is not born from momentary intensity, but from vibrational continuity. And that continuity requires no physical effort, only decision. Once emitted, the thought must become the very center of identity, the unchallenged structure of consciousness. Fourth, there must be a release of all that degrades it. This means letting go of the habit of doubting, of asking when, of waiting for signs, of watching the world to decide whether the thought has worked. The golden frequency holds precisely when the self that thinks no longer monitors outcomes, but begins to live from the certainty that the work is already done. This vibration is not emotional, it is structural. It is not measured by enthusiasm, but by stability. This is why those who reach this state rarely speak of what they are thinking. They vibrate, and that is enough. The presence of someone operating in the golden frequency is felt not because they impose, but because they radiate order. Their world is calm, their gestures adjust. Their words, when spoken, reorganize, not by force of persuasion, but because their vibration allows no distortion. This state is the summit of mental work. From here all technique falls away. No more repetition from duty, no more visualization out of habit. The image is already alive. The thought is now structure. The vibration is constant. And the universe aligns in silence as if recognizing that nothing more needs to be done except obey. When you arrive at this point, the mind stops seeking new formulas. It has found the source. Your work is no longer to think towards something, but to live from it. From a frequency so high that anything not aligned with it simply disappears. Not because you reject it, but because you can no longer descend without betraying your own structure. The golden frequency does not battle density. It does not need to. It simply holds. And that holding alone is enough to illuminate, to attract, to organize. That which is not at its level cannot withstand its presence. It dissolves, transforms, aligns, because the highest does not need to impose, it only needs to remain. This is how you must think from this day on, not from the desire to change the world, but from the certainty that the world responds to the tone you choose to sustain. And if that tone is gold, then everything else, people, events, forms, results, will become a reflection of that incorruptible vibration. Do not be an echo of what happens. Be the emitter of what must be. Do not fall again into the world's oscillation. Anchor yourself in the silent height of sustained thought, and from there remain. For the one who remains commands, and the one who commands their vibration inherits their reality. Chapter 7. Thinking without history. Freeing yourself from the past as a point of origin. One of the greatest obstacles to thinking in a straight line, vibrating with consistency, and creating from the center is the deeply rooted habit of thinking under the weight of the past. I'm not speaking here of episodic memory or functional recall, but of that invisible vibrational inertia that leads the individual to use everything they have lived, suffered, feared, or learned as limitation, as a starting point. It's a prison so subtle it's often mistaken for realism, but it's not realism. It's conditioning disguised as experience. The mind that thinks from history isn't truly creating. It is replaying pre-installed patterns, wrapping its current desires in the shadows of what already happened, of what didn't work before, of what others claimed was impossible. This is a mind saturated with echoes, and while those echoes are present, thought cannot vibrate freely. The past acts like a dense layer that weakens the frequency, disturbs the transmission, and contaminates the purity of the idea. The conditioned self, the self built upon past events, external opinions, unresolved emotions, and failures interpreted as identity, is the main enemy of the solar mind, because its function is not to evolve but to preserve the known. And the known, if charged with limitation, becomes an invisible mold that blocks true transformation. To think without history, then, is to break the unconscious pact with the identity that has defined you until now. It is to refuse to begin any thought from who you were, from what you feared, from what didn't work. It is to declare, I am not my past, and not as a comforting phrase, but as a real vibrational assertion, because the past has no existence outside of the thought that recalls it. And if that thought is not summoned, the past vanishes as an active energy. The solar mind thinks from the absolute present, not as an escape from the past, but as a conscious overcoming of its vibrational residue. Its thoughts do not arise from memory, but from the current center of being. And that is why its emission is clean, no rebound, no curve, no emotional residue, like a pure note, not blended with previous sounds. And precisely because of that, it is powerful. The first step to thinking without history is to interrupt the inner narrative, the one that says, "This isn't for me. I already tried. I've always been this way. No one in my family has ever succeeded." None of these phrases are facts. They are repeated vibrations. They don't represent the present, but an unquestioned loyalty to an outdated version of you, and that loyalty is what prevents the creation of a new reality. The second action is to uninstall the emotion of failure, because as long as any part of you still holds the vibration of what didn't happen, any new thought will be shaded by that past, like invisible ink you don't notice. The thought may say yes, but the emotion whispers, "I'm not sure." That contradiction halts the universal law, because the law only responds to clear frequencies. The third movement is to create from present emptiness, not emptiness as lack, but as a clean canvas. It is a vibrational state where the past is not projected and the future is not anticipated with fear. A place where thought emerges like someone drawing a new line without tracing over the old ones. This kind of thinking is not intellectual, it is structural. It feels like freedom, like inner expansion, as if your thoughts no longer need permission from your history to exist. This is what I call inaugural thinking, a thought that does not arise as a reaction to what was, but as an affirmation of what is now possible, a thought that says, "Something new begins here." And it says it without dragging the old as evidence. That thought creates new realities because it is not conditioned by former ones. When you reach this level, you begin to operate from who you truly are, not from who you were, and you discover that everything you've lived loses power over you. Not because you deny it, but because you no longer vibrate with it. You integrate it as a neutral memory, not as a mold. You no longer think with fear. You no longer decide with caution based on past wounds. You no longer visualize with the emotional break of one who's protected themselves for too long. Now you think as one who no longer has a past, only possibility. And that state is true mental freedom. Because as long as thought is anchored to what was, it cannot project what could be. But once the anchor is lifted, thought becomes like a lightning bolt falling from the sky. It has no shadow, no history, only direction. Thinking without history is not thinking without memory. It is thinking without drag. It is thinking without justification. It is thinking from the present as a pure point of creation. Your past may have been what it was, but in this moment, if you don't think it, it doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, it holds no power over your frequency. Therefore, stop thinking like someone who was something and begin to think like someone who is what they now choose. Not from the wound, but from the center. Not from repetition, but from radiance. Not from memory, but from the light that does not depend on time. Because the solar mind does not remember, it establishes, and what it establishes becomes reality. Chapter 8. The self does not react, becoming a mental center of gravity. Exercises to install a mental identity unacceptable to the external world. There comes a moment in the inner journey of every true seeker when they understand that freedom is not about doing whatever they want, but about not reacting to what they do not choose. It is then that a new kind of power arises within, the power to preserve one's vibrational state intact, even amid noise, criticism, conflict, or chaos. This silent, invisible, deeply ordering quality is the practical manifestation of a mind that no longer revolves around what happens, but has begun to exert its own gravity. In this chapter, we will speak of that gravity, not as a physical phenomenon, but as a vibrational state of mental sovereignty. Because every consciousness can reach a point where it stops being absorbed by its surroundings. It stops revolving around what is foreign. It stops responding to what has not been consulted with the inner self. That point is the mental center of gravity. It is not reached by reading or wishing, but through sustained practice and gradual transformation. A person who does not react is not indifferent. They have refined their attention to the point of choosing what to think, how to feel, and when to express themselves. They do not respond reflexively to external stimuli, but vibrationally assess whether the event deserves integration into their field. And often the answer is no. because the solar mind does not absorb everything, only what contributes to its purpose. Becoming a mental center of gravity requires first recognizing the centrifugal force of the world. The environment tends to pull attention, emotion, and energy away. A harsh word, a contrary opinion, a contemptuous gesture. These are enough to alter the vibrational field of an untrained mind. But a mind that has installed its center does not move, even though everything around it moves. And this is what transforms its thought into a silent law. How is this unacceptable identity installed? Through three paths: observation, decision, and vibrational retraining. First, observation. There can be no mastery without awareness. The individual must learn to observe their internal impulses with the same attention a scientist gives an experiment. When a stimulus occurs, they must not respond immediately. They must watch, feel, wait. In that space between event and reaction, freedom begins to take shape. That pause is the beginning of the center. Each time it happens and is sustained, the conditioned self loses strength, and the conscious self expands territory. Then comes decision, because no one becomes unacceptable by accident. One must choose, not once, but many times. Choose not to respond, choose not to argue, choose not to defend, not out of weakness, but because they have discovered that reaction is lost energy, and non-reaction is concentrated energy. That concentration begins to form the core of internal gravity. The mind no longer seeks out, no longer swings like a pendulum. It settles, remains, radiates. Finally, vibrational retraining. Here begins the greatest work. The individual must begin to build within themselves a new vibrational identity, not based on history, character, or emotion, but on the conscious decision to be a center from which all is ordered. This means defining how they want to think, how they want to feel, how they want their thoughts to operate in the world, and then sustaining that vibrational form day after day until it ceases to be effort and becomes a state. It is not about pretending calm. It is about installing calm as structure. It is not about seeming strong. It is about becoming the source of a vibration that does not depend on the external to hold, because the power of the center is not in its volume, but in its stability. It is invisible, but it is force. It does not need to impose itself. It simply does not move. An essential exercise to begin this process. Each morning, before speaking a word, before reading, before looking at the world, sit in silence and affirm yourself internally. Today I remain. Today I choose from within, and today I do not surrender my vibration to any event not summoned by my purpose. This phrase is not a ritual, it is a vibrational command. By repeating it from the center, an invisible sphere of gravity begins to form within you, and everything not in tune with it will begin to lose power over you. And when something tries to pull you out of that center, a criticism, a difficulty, a provocation, return to that affirmation, not as a phrase, but as an internal structure. Do not respond, do not defend, do not adjust your tone, do not vibrate downward, remain. And in that remaining you will notice the world loses the power to drag you, and you begin to attract it. Because that is the secret. Those who do not react begin to gravitate, and what once disturbed them now surrounds them, recognizes them, obeys them, not because they impose it, but because their frequency has become stronger than the environment's. This state is not reached immediately, but each day you choose not to respond, each time you hold your vibration in the face of chaos, every thought you refuse to give to external judgment, you are forming a new core within, and that core is your true power. The self that does not react is not a passive God, it is a radiant God. It does not depend, it does not beg, it does not compete, it only emits, and from that constant, firm, silent emission the world reorganizes. Because the law is not imposed by shouting, it is established by presence, and you are here to establish. Chapter 9, the solar silence where thought reorders by law. Accessing the unmoving point where thought restructures itself through vibrational coherence, not effort. There is a higher law that does not act with speed, but with precision. It does not manifest amid noise, but at the deepest center of order. This law does not respond to effort, but to alignment. And the man who has discovered it no longer thinks to solve problems, no longer asserts to conquer chaos, no longer visualizes as one trying to control. This man has learned the most forgotten and most powerful art of all, the art of solar silence. Solar silence is not the absence of thought, nor is it an escape from the mind. On the contrary, it is the unmoving point from which the mind begins to vibrate with such purity coherence, and exactness that it no longer needs to correct itself. It is the state where thought reorganizes not because someone controls it, but because the universal law, without noise, violence, or interruption, realigns it by natural correspondence. This silence cannot be reached by haste, nor by the anxiety of those seeking results. It reveals itself only when the self has stopped pushing, when the will no longer struggles, when the thinker stops yelling at the universe and settles within himself, like one who has remembered that everything is sustained by an intelligence deeper than his own effort. Thought in its natural state tends toward order, tends to form, tends to vibrate in harmony, but this tendency can only operate when it is not interrupted by tension, contradiction, or frantic attempts to achieve. The solar mind knows this. It does not correct thought from the mind. It submerges it in silence and lets the law align thought like a current of water. When the water is agitated, everything distorts, shapes, reflections, background. But when the water settles without external intervention, everything that was out of place begins to fall into line. This is how solar silence works. It does not eliminate thought, it stills it. And from that stillness, thought reorganizes through natural resonance. This process is deeply practical. It does not require intellectual understanding, only presence. To access it, the individual must first surrender control, not of thought itself, but of the outcome. Because as long as thought is driven by the urgency to produce immediate effects, it continues to vibrate at a low frequency. But when the thinker enters silence without expectation, urgency, or pressure, the frequency rises naturally, because thought ceases to be a reaction and becomes a field. The second requirement is the voluntary suspension of judgment. In solar silence, there is no analysis, no interpretation, no measurement, no saying, this is good or this is not working. Thought is inhabited as a living form without invasion by evaluation, and this allows the original vibrational structure, the purest, the highest, to begin emerging not through mental construction, but through the removal of interference. The third access is surrender without loss of awareness, not passive surrender, but active surrender to a higher order. That is, no longer trying to move things with personal force. I align myself, I still myself, I maintain the state. And when that state is maintained without desire to change it, without need to understand it, a greater force activates and organizes everything from within. This state may last seconds or minutes, it does not matter. What matters is its quality, not its duration. A moment in solar silence can correct what weeks of affirmations could not, because it is not the quantity of thought that transforms, but its vibrational quality. And quality is only reached when thought arises from unity, not division. Those who regularly access this state begin to live from unshakable stability. Their thought becomes so precise, so simple, so direct, it no longer requires adjustments. There is no need to evaluate if it is working. They know it is. There is no anxiety to see results. They know they have already been planted. There is no oscillation, only permanence. And in that permanence the law responds, because the universe does not obey volume but precision, not forced intensity but sustained clarity. And that clarity does not arise from effort, it reveals itself in silence. Therefore, from today, make space for stillness, not as escape, but as a vibrational affirmation. Plant the thought, then quiet it. Do not monitor it, do not exhume it, do not dissect it. Enter solar silence as one enters a temple, not to ask but to vibrate, not to correct but to let the law do its work. And you will see that little by little your mind transforms. It no longer thinks with fear, no longer doubts, no longer forces itself. It simply vibrates, radiates, sustains, and what it sustains it forms, and what it forms it receives, and what it receives it does effortlessly. Because thought that has passed through the crucible of solar silence no longer needs to defend itself. It is living law in action. Chapter 10, The Self That Knows. To think without needing confirmation. How to think from deep knowing, not from lack of certainty. Thought born from doubt loses its power before it reaches its destination. It may be beautifully formed, repeated with discipline, accompanied by emotion, even noble intention. But if it's not backed by knowing, by the silent awareness that what is thought already exists, it fragments, wavers, dissolves. There is no force more powerful than thought sustained by a God who does not ask, but already knows. Most people think from a place of uncertainty. They do so out of desire to attract, to provoke, to obtain something they do not yet possess. They affirm, visualize, decree, but deep inside their vibration lingers the feeling that something is missing, that there is a gap between what is thought and what is real. And that gap is not measured by time, it is measured by doubt. Doubt is the most subtle and destructive form of vibrational sabotage. Thought that seeks external confirmation has not yet understood the law. It believes it needs proof. It believes it needs visible results to know if it is working. But the solar mind operates differently. It thinks from knowing, not from hope. It emits from recognition of an internal truth, not from yearning for something to happen. Its thinking is not searching, it is declaring. The self that knows no longer needs to observe the outside world to validate its thought. It does not examine conditions. It does not wait for signs. It does not demand evidence. It lives as if reality has already responded because its vibration has reached the point where the visible form is only a matter of time, and time no longer alters faith. Thought born from this knowing becomes structuring. It is not an emotional impulse, it is a vibrational stroke, and that stroke is not erased by the winds of the external. How does that knowing settle in? Not through reasoning, but through identification. Knowing is not a logical conclusion, it is a state, an intimacy with the truth. It is the vibrational sensation that there is no gap, no doubt, no separation between thought and its manifestation. This state is not reached by repeating that something is true. It is reached by becoming one with it. You do not think I will have health, you think I am health. You do not think abundance will come, you think I am abundance in motion. The self that knows does not project the result into the future. It declares it in the present, not as fiction, but as a real frequency. And that frequency is not negotiable. It does not shift with the days. It does not adjust to circumstances. It remains. To think from knowing is not arrogance. It is vibrational authority. It is the state where the individual has become so coherent with themselves, so clear in their inner identity, so firm in their direction, that the thought they emit is not an idea, it is a decree. And decrees are not repeated, they are sustained. They are not awaited, they are embodied. They are not argued, they are lived. Here lies the difference between immature thought and solar thought. The first asks for proof. The second is the proof. The first wants to convince itself. The second has already chosen to believe, and this kind of belief is not fragile, it is structure. It is certainty that does not need to become words. It is an inner current that, once activated, is not interrupted by lack of visible results, because it knows the invisible has already been ordered. The self that knows moves by conviction, not by validation. Its life does not revolve around what happens, but around what it emits. It does not seek security outside because it has made knowing its inner home, and that home is inviolable. Time may pass, conditions may change, there may be empty days, but knowing does not move because it does not depend on the world. It organizes it. To cultivate this state, all anxious observation habits must be eliminated. Every time you watch the environment looking for signs that it is working, you confess that you still do not know, that there is still separation between your thought and your identity, that the self that affirms has not yet embodied what it affirms. And while that separation persists, the vibration will not be stable. That is why the deepest work is not to think better. It is to become what you think. It is not enough to affirm. You must inhabit the affirmation as one who no longer needs to say it. You must vibrate as one who no longer waits. You must act as one who does not pretend to know if they do not. And this knowing cannot be faked. It cannot be imitated. It is felt, it settles, it becomes as natural as breathing. And when reached, thought becomes action, and action shapes, and form becomes confirmation, not asked for, but inevitable. This is how you must operate from now on. Not as one who waits for things to happen, but as one who has decided they already have. Not as one who desires, but as one who knows. Not as one who asks, but as one who vibrates. Because the self that knows no longer seeks results, it is the result. Chapter 11. Origin Mindset, Thinking as if it has already happened. The secret of creative thought that does not ask, but affirms. The mind that asks has not yet taken possession of the world it desires. The mind that affirms has. This is the great inner shift that separates the thinker who waits from the creator who already operates as cause. Every truly creative thought does not ask, it establishes. And it does not do so as an act of blind faith, but as a natural affirmation of an inner state that no longer debates. This is what I call the origin mindset, the mental attitude of one who does not think to obtain, but thinks from what has already been obtained. The universe does not respond to what is wished for, but to what is believed to be. That is why the highest secret of creative thought is not in imagining a future, but in assuming that future as present. It is thinking as if it has already happened, not by autosuggestion, but because the mind has been elevated to such a degree of certainty that it no longer projects. It remembers. This is the key. Creative thought does not build forward. It vibrationally returns to an origin where all has already been made. It does not walk toward the result, but settles in the consciousness of the result already manifested, and from there it thinks, acts, decides, and lives. There is no process of searching, only expression. There is no tense will, only revealed identity. When thought operates from the origin mindset, form becomes an echo. Conditions are not pushed by the force of desire, but attracted by the coherence of the inner state. All that is needed, people, opportunities, answers, paths, begins to organize itself, not because the individual provokes it, but because their vibration admits no other option. This is what changes the nature of thought. It ceases to be a tool for obtaining and becomes the natural expression of a consciousness that already possesses. Affirmation is no longer repeated to achieve, but spoken as a consequence of knowing. Visualization is no longer done to attract, but as a manifestation of something already given. The mind no longer revolves around time. It inhabits the now as if all has already been fulfilled, and by doing so, fulfills it. The origin mindset requires no proof because it has become cause. It does not seek signs because its very presence is a sign. It does not wait for circumstances because it knows circumstances follow the state, not the other way around. How is this mindset attained? First, by fully assuming the image of the result as if it is already fulfilled. This is not a technique, it is an incarnation. One must feel oneself in the final scene of the desire already manifested, not as a spectator, but as the protagonist. One must walk with the consciousness of having already received, even if the visible has yet to respond. One must speak, decide, and move with the vibration of one who does not seek, but confirms. This kind of thought reorganizes the entire vibrational structure, because when the mind no longer says, "I hope," or "maybe when it happens," and instead begins to say, "This already is, this already was, this is fulfilled," the subconscious takes it as law, and what the subconscious accepts, the universe manifests. This is not an intellectual act, it is a complete inversion of the vibrational axis. The self ceases to live as lack and affirms itself as cause. Thought ceases to project as expectation and becomes affirmation without retreat. The world is no longer the place where something might happen, but the field where everything sustained as internal truth must appear. This is how the master builder, the artist, the true inventor thought. They did not begin their work in doubt, but with a finished vision. The mind had already seen the temple before laying the first stone, and every subsequent action was not a search, but execution. That is the difference between the one who desires and the one who creates. One waits for signs, the other acts from the end. The solar mind operates this way, living in the end, even if the environment has not yet registered it. It does not react to what it sees, it sustains what it has emitted. It does not adjust its vibration according to external response. It maintains, affirms, and radiates it, because it knows that every reality is born at the point where consciousness has settled without return. Therefore, from now on, do not think like one who is going towards something. Think like one who already has it. Do not affirm to reach. Affirm because you have arrived. Do not project the future, inhabit it. Act from the place where you already are. Speak from the identity already sealed in your vibration. Walk like one who has already fulfilled their decree. And the universe, which never ignores the true cause, will respond in form. Because thinking from origin is the key. And whoever thinks from origin no longer creates, they order. They no longer seek, they manifest. They no longer doubt, they vibrate. Chapter 12. The Mental Stillness, Power Without Friction. How to master the field without entering the struggle. A paradox unfolds in the most subtle realms of thought. When one no longer operates from seeking, when desire has transformed into identity, and affirmation ceases to be a voluntary act to become a natural state of being, a peculiar and immensely powerful phenomenon emerges: mental stillness. This is not passivity nor inertia. It is a point of consciousness so deeply rooted in its axis that it no longer needs to turn, adjust, or react in order to exert influence. And yet, from this apparent immobility, everything begins to move. Here lies the paradox of the law. The most powerful thought is not the one launched with force, but the one that remains in place without friction. It does not accelerate, adjust, or stir. It is a pure, vibrational focus acting as an organizing field. Like the sun, which neither pushes nor shouts nor intervenes, yet without which nothing would grow, the immobile thought exercises total dominion without effort. For years, I have taught the importance of visualizing, affirming, repeating, and sustaining, all necessary phases of training. But once thought has been purified, aligned, and established, comes the moment to stop moving it. Because constant movement, though it may appear as spiritual activity, often hides doubt. The one who moves all the time, who constantly adjusts, who repeats anxiously, has not yet trusted their own emission. Mental stillness is the highest form of certainty. It is the state where thought ceases to be a tool and becomes a center. And that center organizes, attracts, and orders because it has reached a superior vibrational density. It asks for nothing, needs no defense, seeks no acceleration. It simply remains. And the world, in contact with that vibration, adapts. This state cannot be faked. It is only reached when the soul has fully released the need to see before believing, when one no longer thinks as someone who waits, but as one who knows their vibration is obeyed by laws that never fail. At that point, thought becomes invisible structure. It does not launch, it radiates. It does not justify, it organizes. It does not move, it transforms. Those who live in this state begin to discover a kind of power no longer dependent on techniques or conscious acts. Form responds, matter accommodates, people arrive, right decisions appear, not because something was done, but because something was sustained without alteration. And that is what the law recognizes: stable vibration, not variable effort. Imagine a mountain. It does not need to move to change the course of the winds. It does not argue with the rain. It does not seek validation from the clouds. It simply remains, and in its permanence, it determines. So too must thought operate at its highest form, not constantly correcting, not arguing with appearances, not intervening at every step, but establishing itself as that. When thought has reached this point, it stops creating friction. Friction is the resistance born between intention and doubt, desire and distrust, image and expectation. But when all this has been purged, the mind becomes a smooth field, a surface of order, and from that surface reality projects without noise. Many seek to master the world by changing conditions. The few who understand the law master the world by becoming a focus that needs to change nothing, because everything changes around their presence. True mastery begins when one no longer argues with the environment, when thoughts are no longer launched like missiles, but a state is held like the sun. It does not launch, push, or demand, it emanates. This stillness is actually the source of all true movement, because only one who has stopped scattering their energy can fully radiate it. Only one who no longer seeks control can generate order. Only one who has become completely still in their certainty can move, without trying, the entire fabric of their surroundings. Here lies the subtlest law. What remains rules, and what does not alter transforms. What does not need to move makes everything move. From now on, begin to notice within yourself unnecessary movements. Every doubt that pushes you to repeat what you have affirmed, every thought that seeks external reaffirmation, every attempt to accelerate manifestation, recognize them as signals that you have not yet reached the apex, and then do not strive any longer. Stop, breathe, return to the center. Hold your thought as if it were already rock. Do not move it anymore, and in that stillness you will feel for the first time true power. Power that does not drain because it does not disperse. Power that needs no proof because it requires no defense. Power that, from its silence, commands the world without raising its voice. This is the power of the solar mind. When thought no longer needs to create, it simply remains, and in its remaining everything obeys. Chapter 13, Solar Wealth, Thriving Without Chasing. The abundance mindset that radiates instead of attracts. Why does wealth arrive at the center, not at the edge? There is a kind of wealth that never stays, slipping away as quickly as it comes. It demands tension, disproportionate effort, constant vigilance, and vibrational wear. This is the wealth of the edge, the kind sought from lack. It's built on the fear of not having enough, born from a mind that chases instead of emanates. This wealth may be visible, but it is unstable. It can be bought, but it cannot be sustained. Because it wasn't born from the center, it was pursued from the extremes. True wealth, the kind that remains, grows over time, and multiplies without obsessive effort, is solar wealth. It is abundance that is not attained through pressure, but received through vibrational correspondence. It does not arrive because it has been begged for, but because it has been sustained as an inner state. The mind that remembers its central nature no longer asks, no longer fears, no longer negotiates with the universe. It radiates. And everything that radiates from the center becomes a natural point of attraction, not because it has been called, but because the law of the circle responds to the focal point. In every living system, that which holds the highest vibrational density, that which is unshaken, undoubting, balanced, becomes the center, and the center by its very presence receives. The great mistake of men is seeking wealth from the periphery of their being. They look outside, work from scarcity, strive to reach what they believe is distant, and in that process lose the center that would make them rich without pursuit. Because wealth does not respond to physical effort, but to internal vibration. It does not follow undirected action, but the state that has been maintained with clarity. It does not come to the mind that runs, but to the mind that emits. Wealth is structure, it is frequency, it is the result of a vibrational cause, not a sequence of random events. That is why the highest work a person who desires to prosper can do is not to move more external pieces, but to become a constant source of internal abundance, not as an idealized image, but as a sustained identity. The solar mind does not chase wealth, it embodies it, not because it ignores the laws of exchange, but because it knows the true exchange is not between bills, but between frequencies. Those who vibrate in scarcity, no matter how tirelessly they work, cannot maintain what they receive. Those who vibrate in fear, even if they accumulate, will never feel ownership. But those who vibrate from the center in serenity, sufficiency, and anticipated gratitude call forth wealth without conflict, because they no longer desire it from lack, but recognize it as a reflection. To prosper without chasing thought must be purged of every trace of need. Wealth cannot manifest if thought is born from urgency. Abundance cannot be invoked if the accompanying emotion is fear. Every thought born from anxiety bends before arriving, but the thought born from a self that already is, already has, already knows, that thought does not bend, it radiates. This is why the secret lies in thinking like a wealthy person before receiving wealth. It's not about pretending or imagining an unsupported fortune. It is about adopting the vibrational tone of sufficiency, acting as if everything necessary is already on its way, deciding as one who already possesses, giving as one who never fears loss. And this attitude not only calls wealth, it makes it an inevitable consequence. Everything in creation flows toward what remains. All that is valuable settles where there is order. Every useful energy seeks a firm channel through which to express itself, and the mind that has been turned into a stable, radiant, serene solar center becomes that channel. It no longer needs to chase gold, because gold naturally moves toward what shines without anxiety. This is what accounting books don't teach, that wealth is above all a mental state. It does not begin with saving or investing or opportunity. It begins with identity. It begins with the idea a person holds about themselves. It begins with the renunciation of chasing and the firm decision to vibrate. So if you wish to prosper without friction, begin today to settle into the frequency of one who no longer fears. Do not see your surroundings as judge, but as reflection. Do not interpret the visible as a limit. Do not fall for the illusion that you must get before you can be. Begin by being, and what corresponds to that being will come. Not by magic, not by luck, but by law. Wealth is not out there, it is within you, waiting to be sustained as an unalterable vibration. And when you do, you will see everything else revolve around you, not because you seek it, but because you have become the center. Chapter 14. Suspended Judgment. How to think without comparing or defending, liberating yourself from interpretative noise, the solar mind as a neutral space where everything aligns without friction. Nothing disturbs the frequency of thought more than the constant need to interpret everything. A mind that judges relentlessly, compares without pause, defends itself against what it does not understand, and reacts to what doesn't fit, is a mind overwhelmed with noise. And that noise is not just distraction. It is a vibrational distortion. As long as thought is being evaluated, corrected, or justified, it cannot flow clearly. It cannot settle into a pure frequency. It cannot become the axis. Here lies one of the deepest truths of the mental law. Constant judgment interrupts the creative flow, because when thought judges, it bends. It stops moving in a straight line toward manifestation and begins spiraling, caught in explanations, comparisons, and micro-adjustments, born not from awareness, but from fear. The solar mind, by contrast, does not judge. It observes, holds, radiates. It has learned that every judgment is, at its core, a reaction of the insecure self, the conditioned self, the self that still needs to reaffirm itself through the external. And with full power, it has decided to suspend that habit, not because it ignores what happens, but because it understands that what happens does not need to be classified to be transformed. It only needs to be ordered from a neutral vibrational center. Mental neutrality is not indifference, it is sovereignty. It is not disinterest, it is direction. It is not passivity, it is absolute focus. It is the state where thought no longer revolves around this is good or this is bad, this favors me or this threatens me. It is the point where everything is seen as form, movement, and vibrational possibility, where thought is not stained by interpretation, but establishes itself as an organizing force. The need to judge stems from the habit of defending oneself, and the need to defend comes from the mistaken idea that the environment holds power over us. But the person who has built their axis, who has established their frequency, who no longer negotiates their vibration, does not need to defend against anything because they have understood that everything that does not vibrate with them dissolves on its own. And everything around them, if not useful, is simply noise, noise that is not fought but passed through without being touched. Suspending judgment is not giving up discernment, it is settling into a higher vibrational position, where discernment does not arise from fear, but from clarity. It is observing forms without identifying with them. It is allowing things to be without letting them define who you are. It is stopping measurement to begin emitting. Because whoever measures the world adapts to it, whoever emits it rearranges it. The solar mind operates as a neutral space, not because it is empty, but because it has stopped contaminating itself. It is like a mirror that reflects without clinging, like a river that flows without stopping at obstacles, like the sun that illuminates without preference. And in this state, everything that needs to align does so because it no longer meets resistance. Mental friction arises when thought collides with interpretation, when something happens and the mind says, "This shouldn't happen, this hurts me, this is unfair." That collision creates turbulence, and in turbulence thought loses its axis. But if when something happens the mind simply lets it pass, observes without charge, allows it to be formed without emotional weight, then thought keeps its line, its clarity, its power. This practice requires mastery. It is not achieved immediately, but can begin with a simple gesture, not opining, not because you lack judgment, but because you understand that unnecessary opinion is a waste of energy. True power is not displayed in words, it is installed in vibration. And the most powerful vibration is one that does not need to defend, explain, or assert itself before the outside. In that state, everything aligns because there is no resistance, and where there is no resistance, the law flows perfectly. So from now on, whenever something happens, do not react, do not classify, do not explain, observe, breathe, remain. And from that neutral space, think clearly, emit with intention, not to correct the world, but to establish your frequency. And everything else, the useful, the elevated, the true, will come not by anxious attraction, but by vibrational correspondence. Because the solar mind does not need to control the external, it only needs not to be contaminated by judgment, and by doing so, everything that must align does so without friction. Chapter 15. The center becomes the world when the thinker ceases to be a person. The climax, thinking as totality. No longer thinking to have, but as an emanation of the being that already is. There comes a moment in inner development when all that has been learned, all that has been practiced, all that has been affirmed seems to disappear, not by forgetting, but by fulfillment. It is the moment when the seeker stops seeking, the thinker ceases to formulate, and the Creator ends mental activity as one who has completed their work and contemplates its reflection in the marble of silence. No affirmations remain, no intentions. Only presence remains, and that centered, radiant presence without a name contains everything. This is the final point of the mental journey, when the center no longer thinks to have, but emits because it simply is. And what it emits is not images, not desires, not commands. It is pure vibration, existence itself, a direct emanation of being, without filter, without person, without story. Some might call this divine incarnation, not as a mystical phenomenon, but as a vibratory reality attained by a soul that has renounced separation. Until this point, all thought had been a tool, a bridge between a self that desired and a world that must obey. But in this state, thought is no longer a means. It is an end in itself. It is not used. It is lived. It no longer arises from intention, but unfolds as the inevitable expression of a divine that has remembered its origin. And that origin is not human, not individual. It is not a story. It is the totality reconcentrated in a single point of consciousness. When the thinker stops being a person, it does not disappear. It becomes the world. It no longer identifies with its body, its name, or its history. It becomes pure axis, limitless frequency, a vibratory identity without contour. And from that state, what was once the self becomes field. Mental field, vibratory field, organizing field. The world ceases to be something external and becomes an extension of the center. And here is what is not said. The external world was never real in itself. It was always a projection, a dense image of what was happening deep in thought. The mistake was believing that the world had independent existence. But now the thinker, having ceased to be a person, recognizes that the world emanates from itself, that the environment is only a visible form of an invisible state, and therefore no longer needs to change the world. It only needs to sustain its being. This is the end of reactive mind, the end of vibratory evolution, the end of I want, I must, I hope. There is no struggle, no expectation, only radiation. Reality begins to organize itself like a choir responding to a single note emitted from the center, and that note is not repeated, not shouted, not written. It simply is. The being that has reached this height no longer needs to think to provoke results. Its very existence is order. Its very breath is decree. Its very stability is continuous creation. Because it has ceased to be in the world and has begun to be the world, not in a physical sense, but vibrationally. Because the law no longer operates as something external responding to commands, but as something internal flowing without interruption. Personality has been dissolved, not as negation, but as integration. The small self has surrendered. The self that compared, descended, sought, opined, has ceased activity, not because it has died, but because it has been transcended. And in its place, the true self, the solar self, has taken possession of the temple. It needs no introduction, no argument, it simply is. This is the moment when the solar mind reaches its culmination, not because it masters many techniques, but because it no longer needs techniques. Its frequency no longer depends on voluntary thought. Its radiation requires no mental construction. Its world is not born from desire, it is born from permanence. Because what remains organizes, and what organizes effortlessly sustains everything that was ever sought. Wealth, health, harmony, beauty, these are no longer goals. They are the natural atmosphere of a being that has become a focal point. And that focal point no longer seeks light, it is light. Here ends the journey of thought as a tool and begins the journey of thought as pure emanation. There is no longer need to visualize, affirm, or correct. There is only the need to maintain the state of being as the central vibration. And from there, all that is, all that changes, all that manifests will be a reflection of a center that no longer stirs, no longer seeks, no longer names itself, because it has remembered that it was never a part, it was always the whole. And the whole does not desire, does not need, does not act. Amen.